Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Latched podcast. Melissa here. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Latched podcast is really directed towards moms and parents kind of in the trenches of motherhood. Today, we have an awesome guest. Amanda is here to come kind of talk to us a little bit about all the stuff we normally talk about, pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and we're going to kind of focus on kind of that postpartum time and maybe some mental health stuff having to do with it.
You're listening to Latched Mama Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Wirt, busy mom of 6 and owner of LatchedMama.com. Join us each week as we talk about pregnancy, breastfeeding, postpartum, and all things motherhood.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am a wife, a mom of 2. I live just outside Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm a childbirth educator and a content creator. So I spend the majority of my time talking about birth, postpartum, parent mental health in some form or fashion.
I love it. It sounds like we could be friends if we were closer. I feel like that's my life too. It's all the content all the time. Tell me a little bit about kind of your story and how you got started. I feel like all of our roads to kind of supporting moms look a little differently, but I'm sure it had a little bit to do with your own journey in motherhood.
Yes, 100%. Yep. It started with, wanting to have kids, then having the fortunate experience of getting pregnant, and then thinking about, how's this baby gonna come out? And just starting to research, what my options were. I have rarely been the type of person who was like about to do something or was in the middle of doing something without doing a crap ton of research while I was doing it or about the thing I was going to do. So that's what happened to me when I was pregnant with my daughter, my first. And I decided that I wanted to have some choice in the matter as far as where I gave birth, with whom, to have a support person with us, with my husband and me. So I had a doula. And that really started me down this path because I realized that there were a lot of choices that weren't, mainstream, for lack of a better phrase. And then when I had my son, I took a different childbirth course. So I took one before I had my daughter, then another before I had my son. And I just was fascinated by birth, by the process. I mean, I call it the most common miracle. Like, it happens a lot, but it's a miracle every time. And so I took birthing from within before I had my son, and I was just fell in love with that. And it's birthing from within has a lot of metaphors in it, and it's like a giant metaphor for life. It's way bigger than birth. And so that has applied to a lot of areas in my life. And after I had my son, I left my corporate job for so many reasons that it would take up 5 whole podcast episodes just to talk about that. So I'll just leave it at that quick summary, footnote. And I decided months and months later to start a podcast, and that eventually led me down the road to become a childbirth educator myself. And then I realized that my obsession with birth and postpartum wasn't just relegated to my own experience and me being the one who gives birth, but I kept wanting to talk about it even when I decided, okay, I don't think that I ever want to give birth again, and I'm my family is complete. And here I am, still talking about it, still loving talking about it, and this is what I do every day.
Yeah, I love it. I think that, for those of you who've listened to this podcast before, I say it all the time, I don't think we talk enough about it. I think that we spend a lot of time as a society talking about what you're going to put the baby in when it comes home, or what the best car seat to buy is. And there's some very, very important things that I feel like we could talk about more, especially just that whole, how is your baby going to come into the world? Is it going to be an empowering experience? Is it not going to be? What happens if things get turned on their head? How can you have the support you need? And I don't think, when you look at kind of the broken maternal care system in the United States that we have, and it's broken 17 million times over. It's interesting because I think, not that I want to put the onus on women, but if we can just kind of start shifting the way that we look at how to prepare women to have a child, and really, really, truly starting to set people up to understand that there is an emotional and mental shift that happens as you give birth and afterwards. I think a lot of us would be a lot more prepared for what happens.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible how we don't talk about it. We don't talk about the fact that a woman is a completely different person on the other side of childbirth than she was beforehand.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Did you find that with your kids?
Oh yeah, 100%. And the thing that you are alluding to that I just found out about a couple years ago, there's like a term for it. I'm sure you're familiar with it, matrescence. And it's basically like akin to, anybody who's listening that doesn't know what it is or have never heard of this, it's akin to adolescence. So instead of that transformation, you go from becoming a child to an adult, and an adult state of your body and your mind kind of morphing into one state that you were into the new state that you are. It's the same thing. One day you were not a parent with a child here on the earth on the outside, and then the next day you are. And like you said, that is an entire shift. That is a huge transformation. Like, I even think of, like, whenever I think about the term matrescence or putrescence, because I don't want to leave dads out or anybody that doesn't identify, you know, mom, dad. Like, if you are transforming as a parent, like, I always visualize a butterfly. It sounds corny, but I envision like a caterpillar and then going through that transformation into a butterfly. Like, they're still the same entity as they were at their core, but they are completely different. And I also like to think of postpartum as like that cocoon of, like, I want everybody to have an opportunity to be in a cocoon while they are in the middle of that transformation, when they are like giving birth, and then they have that quiet, precious period in solitude where they are just like transforming and becoming parents. And like every single time, because every time that you welcome a baby, you are transforming in a different way, because you're going from a family of 3 to a family of 4 to a family of eventually 6 or 8. So
and it's so interesting. No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
It's really interesting, like, when you actually look at, and it's funny, I can just say this just because we homeschool our kids and we hatch butterflies every year, but just to take kind of the metaphor like one step further, when you do come at it, when you watch those butterflies come out of the cocoon, like, all of their wings are wrinkly. They can't fly immediately. They're covered in gunk and grossness. Like, there's stuff that they still have to work through before they're fully flying and ready to go out. And I mean, we might be taking the metaphor a little too far, but it's so true though. Like, when you come out of that cocoon, it was interesting after because I'm 7 months postpartum right now. I mean, we're not having any more babies because we have a ton of them. We have half a dozen at this point, but I can tell you, I despise the postpartum period more than any other probably time in my life. I hate feeling uneasy. I hate feeling the hormonal shifts. I hate whatever. But it's interesting because I remember I kind of had my postpartum nest in like another, like above our garage. Like, I kind of had to separate myself away from our family, like during the days, because it was loud and I had to work, but like I didn't want to work like around other people. And I don't know if you've been there before, but it's just, you know, it's an interesting place to be emotionally. And then one day, and it was a little bit longer than it had been with the last few kids, but it was probably a good 3 months after like the baby was born, where I started kind of cleaning up that space. And I remember my mom was in town and she's like, are you done nesting? And it was the cutest thing ever, because I was just like, yeah, I think so. But nobody rushed me out of that space. Nobody said, hey, clean up your breast pump parts that have, been sitting on the counter for ages. It's such an interesting thing when we give the space to feel it and get through it. It's much healthier for the mother and the baby.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I I loved you going on with the metaphor. Like, that's so true. We did actually have butterflies that we hatched. We got like one of those like kits, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And it was very cool to watch the butterflies emerge from their cocoon. And it was very much like birth. And of course, my mind is like, oh my gosh, it's just like birth. It's like kind of gross and graphic, but I love it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, 100%. And another thing that came to mind is, since I am in this, and maybe you can relate, and I talk about this every day, it is more normal to me, and sometimes I lose the perspective of an everyday person that doesn't do this for a living, and how the word postpartum, how that lands with someone, and how it is usually tied to postpartum depression. Yep. I realized that when I was doing research for my postpartum course, and we were like trying to figure out what we were going to name it. And I couldn't think of anything other than the postpartum course. But my biggest hesitation with calling it that was the fact that every time that I would do, research or keyword research, postpartum depression would always come up. And I'm like, but these are very different things. Postpartum depression is a whole thing unto itself. Like, it is a mood disorder. It is important. It deserves a lot of like respect and airtime on its own. But postpartum, that's a whole season that every single parent goes through. Like that's all, like, it's much bigger than that. Like, they're two different things. Yeah. So I just found it to be interesting whenever I realized that.
Yeah. And it just shows that, like, we're almost making the term postpartum, this clinical thing. And like you said, every single person goes through it, and every single person has to wade themselves through it at some point.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about, like, in terms of your courses and your community and things that you've built, what interests you the most in terms of like where we place attention in the United States versus where we should, and things like that. Sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot. No. Like what would you change? Where do you think, given opportunity, how can we make it better and easier in that like transition for mothers?
I don't mind being put on the spot as well, and I love this question. It's a really important question, so that's why I'm kind of pausing when I think about my answer, because I want to give it as much weight as it deserves. So yeah, my initial thought is the resources. I mean, and this isn't going to be a shocker coming from me, who I call everything I do finding your village, and I put an emphasis on the village. And so to me, I think that's the biggest thing that's lacking, is that we don't have that kind of quote unquote village. And so I envision people finding their own village, whether it be people in person or virtual. And when I started Finding Your Village, it started out as my podcast. And this was, I launched it in February of 2020, so literally right before the pandemic. So I didn't envision the need for virtual support at all as we really have needed it the last 2 years. And so to me, it includes all of that. In-person support, virtual support. But the things that we're lacking in this country is not only like the support, but the education about what support is out there. I did a podcast episode on my show a couple months ago with a woman, Leslie Abraham. She is originally from France. She lives in the United States right now. And she is a osteopath. And she talked about, and I mean, like, I didn't even know what an osteopath was before I spoke to her. And she talked about all of these resources that are available to women in France, and the difference that she's noticed about the support that women and birthing people get in the United States versus in France. And then, like, in France, it's just included. It's like what you expect of, like, you're going to go see a pelvic floor PT, you're going to see an osteopath, you're going to go get massages, you're going to get these things done to help rehabilitate your body from pregnancy and from birth, and then mental health as well, rehabilitation if needed, because that seems very reasonable to do, and likely that you might need some support in that area. And so that's just a really big area, is not only the people, but like the education, the fact that we don't even know that it's a thing.
Yeah. And it's so crazy because when you don't educate, it's almost like if you want it, you feel like you shouldn't be wanting it because it's not commonplace. Like, you know, like it's not like if you don't teach somebody that it's okay to want this, or it's not like, I know some of the most powerful moments I've had leading this company have been when I've been vulnerable myself and I've said, hey, you know what, this is really hard. And somebody said, I didn't even know I was allowed to say it's hard. You know, I just had this beautiful birth with this beautiful baby. Like, am I allowed to say that this is hard? You know, where my friend had a C-section that was unplanned or something like that. Like, and if you don't, I feel like, point out the fact that, you know, it deserves attention, and you know there are changes that are happening physically and mentally within your body. You know, in our society, it's almost like, hey, you had a baby, that's great, you know, go back to work, and you know, let's just keep moving on as a country. And it's just a completely broken system that I definitely think needs some change and some things addressed for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, when you ask the question, like that's my immediate thought. That's my initial gut reaction, especially because that's centered around the things that I do every day. But there's a lot that I would add to that as well. Just talking about, you know, the system that's broken, and talking about like your example of processing a birth, and then where that kind of intersects with work. And going back into the workplace. I mean, that whole thing is just broken and crushed into a million little pieces. Like it is so
Absolutely.
Bad. And that's, I mean, alluding to my really long story of leaving corporate America after my second was born. I mean, that's all tied back to it and what I experienced firsthand. And it was so bad that I was like, I don't care. I don't care about everything I had tied up in my worth related to work, which was a whole other thing. I don't care about the money. I don't care about the blank spot on my resume. Like it was so impactful for me that I could not care anymore. I had to just move on and let it go.
It's just it's crazy. You know, I'm writing a piece about the formula shortage right now, and we were talking about, you know, the answer is not breastfeeding. The answer is more formula, as you and I have discussed. But at the same time, like there's a bill on the floor of the Senate that's gonna miss a vote to protect salaried employees from pumping breaks, which they don't get right now. There's like 9 million breastfeeding mothers in the United States that are not protected to be able to pump away from their children right now. Like, and that's not a breastfeeding problem. That is like a respect for women and a respect for mothers problem. So like you said, it's so incredibly broken. All right, I got another question for you.
Go ahead.
You ready?
Yep.
All right. How in kind of our society that is somehow, as moms, we've gotten a little judgmental and competitive, how are you supposed to find a village? If the village is the answer and the community is the answer, how do you navigate finding that through the current channels that are available?
Yeah. I definitely have an answer to that, and I've got like a little framework that I always use when I answer this question. But first, I wanted to address the kind of the mom judgment piece that you talked about, because I think that is a giant symptom of how broken our system is, that we are like 100%. Judging each other, or that we have this trauma response to think that things are black or white. Like that is straight up a trauma response. Like it's gray. It's all gray. Like there are no like this choice or that choice. Like there is a bunch of different choices, and you can change your mind along the way, like totally allowed. And so I just have empathy for all the people that have gone through judgment, that have been judged or who have judged, and just like we need to start with self-compassion and forgiveness for doing that, and then just do better like the next minute, and then just remind ourselves that like anybody that judges us, that is their pain and their hurt coming out toward us. It has nothing to do with us. So it's
just so hard because it's like
it is
no, absolutely. And it's so crazy because we run this crazy big community, and it's so hard to watch all of the broken people try to interact with other broken people. And like because here's the deal, like in the United States, when we talk about everything that's broken, getting help to realize those broken parts and to better yourself is expensive, and it's hard, and it's time consuming, and we're not setting our moms up to be in a place where they can ask for help, they can find the help, they can afford the help. And so therefore you're putting a whole bunch of broken people who are not feeling supported, who are overwhelmed, together in a room and saying the answer is build a village. But hold on, you guys are really too broken to really be interacting with each other right now. So like
it's a mess.
I don't mean to be negative.
No, I get
but it's an absolute like snowball effect of how do you fix something that needs to be fixed, like at its true inner core. You know?
Before I actually do give you that framework, one more aside. No, I'm here for it, but just to kind of preface it, this week has been a collectively really hard week and a horrible week. And to, I think, maybe get through, we've been watching a movie on repeat, as you do with little kids. We've watched the second Lego movie. And I keep thinking about, I don't know if you've seen it, but at the end, not going to give any spoilers, but they changed the song of Everything is Awesome to Everything's Not Awesome. And they talk about this whole like reprise of like, even when things are really crappy and not awesome, like you can still basically find the next right thing to do. And that has been playing in my mind, and I've been thinking about that just to get me through and to think about what is the next right thing I can do. And so I think about this in what you just teed up of like, we're a bunch of broken people. We have, our hearts are in the right spot of like wanting to get this right and like wanting to support each other. But then our crappy, beads in our entity kind of spill out on each other and bump into other people's beads, and it becomes a giant mess when we really sought out to support each other and hold space for each other in the first place. And so that's why I think of how you find a village is really in three ways. And so I look at two types of external resources first. And so the first kind of external resource are like people. So these are like friends and family who you immediately think of, but then resources of people that are service providers or even medical providers. So like your pediatrician can be part of your village. Your pelvic floor physical therapist can be part of your village. Your lactation counselor or your lactation consultant, your doula or postpartum doula. So all of these, your childbirth educator, can all be part of your village. And these are people that even though you're hiring them and you're seeking them out and you're doing a Google search or you're searching in your insurance to find these people, they can still absolutely be part of your village that can help support you. In addition to kind of that older stereotypical idea of a village surrounding a new family to help you bring up this baby of like friends, family, aunt, uncles, that type of thing. So that's one type of external resource. Another type of external resource is a podcast. A book, articles, blogs, a course, anything where you can learn information and like glean what helps you and leave the rest. I think that is another element, another resource that you can have in your toolkit that actually helps you build that village. And that can kind of go hand in hand with those people resources, right? So like maybe you have a mother-in-law that you don't always get along with, but like she loves your children and loves you, and you might not agree on everything, and you might not agree with the way that she says to do things, but she's still there for you and a supportive resource. And then you can read a book about boundaries. That can be part of your village, of how to put a boundary up with your mother-in-law. Yep. And so the two together, kind of make it work. And then the third part of it is internal resources. So this is where we do the work to show up better for ourselves, for our kids, for each other, and support each other. And so that is, internal resources that you can gain through hiring an external resource like a therapist, but then there's stuff you do on your own. And so it's stuff like validating yourself. That can be part of your internal resource of like, if you're feeling like no one's validating you for the amount of work that you're doing or how long and how much energy it takes for you to pump at work. I mean, if you're not getting that validation from the outside, which you're probably not if you live in the United States, then you can validate yourself. And there is work that you can do to do that. There, of course, is like healing work that you can do to heal from trauma or to heal from adverse childhood events. And there's work you can do to process, like pain and suffering that we go through every day, just living as a cost of just being on planet Earth and living, so that we can integrate into our best whole version of ourselves, so that again we can show up, we can hold space for other people, not be on the defensive, not be living in our kind of at our lowest frequency and less integrated self.
I love that. I mean, those are some ideas that like I had never thought of. Definitely thought of doing the work yourself. Reading the books, finding connection through podcasts. But it puts some of that responsibility back, I think, internally on ourselves to try and find, more of that self-worth and that self-healing, as opposed to, find it externally with others as well, which is a really, really, interesting. I'm going to have to mull it over a little bit, but I like it. Yeah. Anything that gives, I feel like, hope that we're not always going to be feeling this way or going this way, because I think it's a process, and I think that that's one of the biggest takeaways that I know I've learned and I've taught people within our community, is that most things do have a stage and most things have a season. And if we can just keep moving forward, things do get better and things do change.
Yeah. And I did want to just clarify that when I talk about these internal resources, I by no means am saying like it's all on you, and if you don't have a village, then you're just gonna have to figure it out and be your own, independent woman. That's not what I mean by this. I mean like truly what we talked about of having radical acceptance for what's going on, because if you're just kind of fighting against that, it creates kind of a blockage. And that just kind of adds to it, not alleviate it. And so if you can do your own work, if you can accept things as they are and then still find some type of hope in that, it really does make things better for you overall. But I just don't want people thinking that I'm saying like, this is on you and you just need to figure it out. Because that's actually the opposite of what I would hope.
Of what you're saying. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally agree. So I love your thoughts. I think that they're a little different than normally what we put out there, which I love. But I think we're both still saying exactly the same thing. Where can people find you, and tell us a little bit more about how they can get kind of linked up with your village and your community that you're building?
Sure. So people can find me at Finding Your Village. That's the name of my podcast. That's where I'm at on TikTok, on Instagram. That's also my website. findingyourvillage.com. And I have a postpartum course that is available now that you can find on my website. The direct website is a partnership that I have started with another friend who's a postpartum doula and a pediatric sleep consultant. And we've started a partnership called Pregnancy to Preschool, where we hope to support parents from pregnancy to preschool. So you can go to pregnancytopreschool.net and find that directly, or you can just check out Finding Your Village.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.